Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 27, The Premier. Sir Patrick Alfred Jennings was a pastoralist and a politician, and he was born on the 20th of March 1831 in Newry, County Down, Scotland, the son of Francis Jennings, a linen merchant, and his wife Mary O'Neill. The Jenningses were descendants of a Dutch family who had gone to England in the 1400s. He was also a direct descendant of John Jennings of Ballymurphy, who in 1633 forwarded his Irish estates rather than change his Roman Catholic religion. Patrick was one of 13 children, and his father died in 1847. One brother, Daniel, remained in Ireland. Two brothers went to the USA. One brother, Peter, died of cholera at St Lawrence River at the age of 21, and the other brother, John, moved to San Francisco and died at the age of only 47. Patrick received his education, which included training in engineering and surveying, in his native town of Newry and in Exeter, England. He lacked the money to study for the bar and trained for a business career with a firm in Exeter. Instead, became a clerk. In December 1852, aged only 21, he went to Victoria and arrived as an unassisted immigrant on the Chaseley. There was a letter that Patrick had written, and it says, "We, the undersigned passengers on board the ship Chaseley, on her voyage from the port of Liverpool via Melbourne to Sydney, Australia, have great pleasure in tendering Captain Peter Slaughter and the officers of this ship our sincere thanks for their uniform kindness and attention to our safety and comfort during the voyage. Signed on board the ship Chaseley, 1st day of December 1852, presented on the 10th day of December 1852, P.A. Jennings, Newry." He joined the 1855 rush to New Bendigo, which is now known as St Arnaud, but his keen commercial sense led him to storekeeping. His ventures extended into quartz mining and crushing in Bendigo and grazing land. He quickly became very wealthy through the quartz and land investments. He only remained in St Arnaud for 8 years, but his name is said to have stood out from all of the others at that time. His prosperous store was then run by his mother, Mary Jennings, and her 3 daughters. Mary and her daughter Margaret arrived on the British Trident, which departed Liverpool on the 12th of September 1857 and arrived in Melbourne on the 4th of December. Getting back to Patrick, in 1857 he became a Justice of the Peace and a magistrate. The Jennings family were staunch Catholics. The first Mass at St Arnaud was celebrated at their residence, and for almost 8 years Patrick lived and played an active part in the growth and development of St Arnaud, and there is a Jennings Street in St Arnaud. In 1858, Jennings declined to run for the Wimmera seat in the Legislative Assembly, but he polled well in St Arnaud, where he concentrated on organising a town community with roads, drainage, water and a court. An original member, he was chairman of the local council. In 1862, with the proceeds of his ventures, he went into partnership with another Irishman, Martin Shanahan, and he brought the sheep station Warbricken near Deniliquin in New South Wales. Martin Shanahan had arrived in Australia as a free settler, and he'd purchased land on the Richardson River on the Marnoo Plains in Victoria in 1845. There, him and his wife raised 7 children. In Yvonne Palmer's book, The Track of the Years, there is reference to Martin Shanahan. In 1876, a Mr Farrell of Maryborough, Victoria, visited the stations on the Avon and wrote an account of Marnoo and its owner, the great rich Shanahan, that owns stations all over the country. He owns 170,000 acres of land which he never saw, besides the countless thousands which he has seen. Shanahan doesn't know the end of his wealth. He gave £62,000 for a station he never saw and will never see, and £72,000 for another, besides 3 other stations in New South Wales. He has 7 children and a station for each of them, and when one of his daughters got married to Mr Vaughan the other day, he gave her a little present of £20,000. He has a woolshed half the size of Maryborough, and his great complaint was that where he used to shear 50,000 sheep, he now, in consequence, only shears 20,000. Martin Shanahan was a self-made man. He did attain great wealth, but retained his simple and unostentatious habits, and was shrewd, straightforward and economical in his dealings, though he often lavishly was generous in both public and private affairs. In 1863, Patrick Jennings married Martin Shanahan's daughter, Mary Ann, at the Shanahan's Marnu homestead, and they moved to Warbricken Station. They went on to have 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. Mary Ann's sister married a brother of Archbishop Robert Bede Vaughan, and brother John married a daughter of Sir John O'Shanassy, who was a fellow Irish-born politician and businessman. When Martin Shanahan died in 1882, his son carried on the partnership with Patrick Jennings. His financial interests were expanding rapidly, and by 1882 he had extensive holdings throughout Australia. They held Garrawilla near Gunnedah, Denobally and Ullambembry near Coonabarabran, and in 1874 they acquired Westbrook, 80,000 acres on the Darling Downs, which was Jennings's final home after Warbricken was sold in 1885. Jennings was said to be a fine athlete, and he soon became involved in public life in Deniliquin. He joined the Riverine Association, founded in 1863, but did not support separation, although he would have benefited from closed Victorian markets. In 1865, he refused to take the district's grievances to the Imperial government in London, as he believed that they should be settled locally. When James Martin visited the Riverina in 1867 and offered Legislative Council nominations to increase Riverina's meagre representation, Jennings was the only member of the association to accept. In 1867 to 1870, he served in the council, and in 1870 to 72, he represented the Murray in the Legislative Assembly. In July 1868, Mary and Patrick gave a party in honour of their guests, the Earl of Belmore, Governor of New South Wales, and his wife, and the Premier of New South Wales, James Martin. There were 200 guests at the picnic, held at a spot 3 miles below the homestead on the banks of the Warkle Creek. A party of blacks were invited to take part in archery contests, and they managed to riddle the target with arrows, despite the fact that none of them had seen or used a bow and arrow before. This caused some embarrassment and misgivings to the whole guests, who were not able to do nearly as well. Jemmy Dick, the Aboriginal king of Warbricken, was present on this occasion. The king was a big man, and his English vocabulary was limited to "mine wanted tickpence." When the Shanahan-Jennings partnership took up another sheep station in New England, Jennings continued his political pursuits. Defeated at Mudgee in 1874, he did go on to represent the Bogan area in 1880 to 1887. Reports in Sydney papers in May 1870 give an interesting picture of another aspect of the man. It said Jennings has a good-natured face, and when he reads, he shoves his nose down against the paper, and you'd fancy he was feeling his way along the lines with his nose, just as blind children do with their fingers at school. In 1876, Patrick Jennings was featured in a gallery titled Men of Mark at the American Centennial Exhibition. There were more than 100 photographs on display, and Jennings's came third. His photo was next to Mark Twain's. In 1874, he was honoured with the Knight of St Gregory the Great, and in 1876 was made a Knight Commander of the Order of St Gregory the Great. He was created Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George in 1879, and in the following year, Australian Knights Commander of the Order of St Michael and St George. In 1885, he received the Grand Cross of this order, which conferred him on the title of Marquis. He had no hesitation in seeking honours and wrote to the Cardinal Moran explaining his suitability. In 1878 to 1897, Jennings made the largest individual contributions to Catholic building appeals. In 1868 to 72 and 1874 to 91. His princely liberality enabled his friend Archbishop Vaughan to open a library there. In January 1883, Jennings was a Vice President of the Executive Council in Alexander Stewart's ministry, but on the 31st of July resigned, explaining that his own people were discontented with his position in Cabinet. As Sir Patrick Jennings, in 1885, he was briefly Colonial Secretary in George Gibbs's government and then led the opposition. When Robertson fell, Jennings failed to coalesce with him and reluctantly accepted the invitation to form his own ministry on the 26th of February 1886 to become Premier of New South Wales. He was the first practising Catholic Premier and the only non-Labor one. His comment that he was not a prominent politician undervalued his importance, as he had been offered ministerial office early in 1870 and twice later. As Premier and Colonial Treasurer, Jennings was unfortunate in inheriting a serious financial crisis that helped precipitate a major political dislocation. His policy to meet the crisis included retrenchment, increased stamp duties, land and income taxes, and a proposal to impose a 5% tariff. His customs bill provoked intense debate in the colony. Its passage through the Assembly was finally secured by parliamentary tactics, which made its opponents label the government a brutal ministry. And on the 19th of January 1887, Jennings resigned. He lived in Colebrook, a house noteworthy for its impressive ballroom and cast iron decorative work. Banjo Paterson wrote an unflattering poem about him called The Deficit Demon, in which he describes how the people put forward a champion known as Sir Patrick the Portly. As in the midnight the tomcat who seeketh his love on the housetop lifteth his voice up and is struck by the fast whizzing brick bat, drops to the ground in a swoon and glides to the silent hereafter, so fell Sir Patrick the Portly at the stroke of the Deficit Demon. By the 1880s, he'd already shown his capacity as an organiser, administrator and benefactor in less controversial fields. In 1875, he was a New South Wales Commissioner for the Colonial Exhibition in Melbourne, and next year Representative Commissioner for New South Wales, Queensland and Tasmania at the Philadelphia Exhibition. He was the Executive Commissioner for the 1879 Sydney International Exhibition, and its success owed much to his administrative capacity. He was the Vice President of the Agricultural Society of New South Wales in 1876 to 87. He helped procure it to a permanent site in Moore Park. He was a Fellow of the University of Sydney Senate in 1883 to 91 and a Trustee of the National Art Gallery of New South Wales in 1885 to 97. His lifelong interest in music was combined with his interest in higher education when he gave £1,000 towards an organ for the University of Sydney in 1879. Music was his major cultural interest. In St Arnaud, he had led local amateur concerts and sometimes joined visiting professional singers in public performances of Rossini and Verdi. He was president of the Sydney Liedertafel, and his patronage rescued it from an embarrassing situation in 1882. He was a member of the Union Club and in the 1880s was a local director of the London Chartered Bank of Australia, the Intercolonial Life Assurance Annuity and General Association and the Colonial Mutual Life Assurance Society. In 1887 he visited Ireland and received an honorary LLD from Dublin University. 2 years later his wife died, aged only 42, on the 1st of March 1889 and was buried in a grave in Waverley Cemetery. In the Lady Chapel of St Mary's Cathedral, Sydney, there is a stained glass window dedicated to Dame Mary Ann Jennings that has been placed there by Patrick Jennings. He was called back to the Legislative Council in 1890 and he was a member of the Senate of Sydney University, a Fellow of St John's Catholic College and a Trustee of the Sydney Art Gallery. By the 1890s, Warbricken had been sold and he continued to live in Colebrook until 1892. Through drought, financial crisis and his own failing health, one by one he lost control of his New South Wales properties. By 1893 he held only Westbrook and succeeded in selling part of it for closer settlement. There he led a quiet, retired life but took a keen interest in benevolent and social movements. He died in Brisbane on the 11th of July 1897 after travelling there to attend a wedding. His body was returned by rail to Sydney via the Jennings's township for burial in the family vault in the Waverley Cemetery. His estate in New South Wales was sworn for probate at £4,400. Today in the Waverley Cemetery, Sydney, overlooking the sea, lies the neglected grave of an Irishman who was once the first non-Labor Catholic Premier of New South Wales, surmounted by a tall cross that bears the words, "A good name is better than great riches, and good favour is above silver and gold." A stained glass window was erected at St John's College with his family crest that commemorates Sir Patrick Alfred Jennings. He was described as a man of equable temperament and a range of informed interest, an organiser, administrator and benefactor, and had attractive personal qualities. His obituary in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 12th of July 1897 stated, "As a politician, it may truly be said that he made no enemies. Those who were privileged to know him personally cannot bear not less generous testimony to his private qualities. He is acknowledged for the influence of culture and represented our public life to a high standard of personal character." He was also described as a clear-headed, cultured Irishman who turned every honest opponent into contact with him into an admiring friend. And on 12th of July 1897, the Brisbane Courier reported the death of Sir Patrick Jennings. Sir Patrick Jennings, whose frequent presence at Toowoomba residence has made him very well known and highly esteemed on the Darling Downs and in other parts of Queensland, died yesterday morning at the Ormiston Private Hospital, Gregory Terrace. Sir Patrick had come to Brisbane about a fortnight ago to attend the wedding of Miss Perkins and Mr R. McDonnell at St Stephen's Cathedral, and it was then noticed that his health was failing and that his infirmity rendered assistance constantly and necessarily. He, however, attended the celebration and very soon after became confined to his bed and was obliged to go to the private hospital for treatment. There he received all the attention that medical skill could suggest, and his 2 sons and daughters were with him. But all efforts proved unavailing, and he died from syncope supervening on diabetes at 8:30 yesterday morning at the age of 66, the last rites of the church being administered. The body has been embalmed and will be removed to Sydney by this morning's mail train, and the funeral will take place on Wednesday. The Honorary Sir Patrick Alfred Jennings was the son of the late Francis Jennings of Newry Island. Born in 1831, after some mercantile experience in Exeter, England, he arrived in Victoria in 1852, fairly successful on the goldfields. In 1855 he settled at St Arnaud, where he introduced elaborate quartz crushing machinery. In 1863, having secured a pastoral station at Warbricken, he henceforth followed the life of a squatter in the Riverina district of the mother colony, taking a leading part in the agitation that sprang up for the separation of the Riverina from New South Wales and its constitution into a distinct colony. The then Premier, James Martin, as a compensation, offered to nominate several leading local gentlemen to the Legislative Council of New South Wales. He was the only member of the Riverina Association who accepted this diplomatic invitation in 1867. In 1869 he resigned his seat on the Legislative Council and stood for the Popular Chamber. He was elected and remained representative of the Murray District until 1873. In 1874, Mr Jennings received the Order of St Gregory the Great, and in 1875 acted as a Special Commissioner for New South Wales at the Victorian Exhibition. In 1876, he represented New South Wales, Queensland and Tasmania at the Philadelphia Exhibition and subsequently visited Europe. He was presented to the late Pope and received the distinction of Knight Commander of St Gregory the Great. And Mr Jennings was created a knight in 1880. From January to July 1883, he was Vice President of the Executive Council in the Stewart Ministry and was Colonial Treasurer in that of Mr Dibbs from October to December 1885. In February 1886, he became Premier of New South Wales with the office of the Colonial Treasurer, but resigned in January of the next year and was one of the representatives of his colony at the Colonial Conference held in London in 1887. Subsequently, he revisited Rome and was created the Grand Cross by Pope Leo. Married in 1864 to Mary Ann, daughter of M. Shanahan of Marnu, Victoria.
Just a little on how Patrick's family fared after their emigration to Australia.
Patrick's sister Margaret married Hugh Herbert Daly Kelly on the 30th of October 1871 at Warbricken Station near Deniliquin. Hugh was the eldest son of the late John Kelly of Deniliquin. John Kelly was a police magistrate that oversaw Deniliquin, Moama and Moolameen. Hugh commenced his pastoral career with the late James Tyson at Juanbung, and after a wide experience on extensive properties owned by Mr Tyson, he entered into the service of Shanahan and Jennings and took over Warbricken Station near Deniliquin in 1866. After some years, he went for a short period to Wolseley Gibbs and Co.'s Cobran Station. In 1872, Mr Kelly married Margaret Jennings, the younger sister of Patrick, and subsequently took over the management of Billilla Station on the Darling that was owned by Shanahan and Jennings. In April of 1873, he took delivery of Garrawilla, Goorianawa, Yulambumbury and Bella stations, which had been purchased by Shanahan and Jennings. Mr Kelly managed all these properties for 25 years, and once they were sold, he purchased Garrawilla for himself. Mr Kelly made Garrawilla his principal home up until his death. He was widely known and respected and held in high esteem by his employees, and him and Margaret had no children.
Hugh died in Sydney in 1913 and left quite a bit in his will to his family members. His wife, Margaret Blanche Jennings, died at the age of 99 in 1938, and when her probate went through, her personal estate was valued at £14,500.
Sister of Patrick's, Elizabeth, married John Quigley, Esquire, in Ireland. John Quigley was a merchant from Castleblaney. He died, and then she came out to Australia and married Thomas Gormley, Esquire, on the 6th of May 1867 at St Francis Xavier Church in Carisbrook, Victoria. Thomas and Elizabeth ran the St Arnaud store after Patrick handed it over after 1857. Elizabeth had a daughter, Ellen Quigley, in Ireland in 1852, but records do not show whether she survived beyond infancy. Elizabeth had a daughter with Thomas Gormley, Mary, in 1868 in St Arnaud. Mary did not marry and died in St Arnaud in 1934. Elizabeth died in St Arnaud on the 9th of October 1907, aged 79, at her residence at Canterbury Street. Patrick's mother died on the 26th of November 1874 at her residence, Trelane, in Point Piper Road at Wallara in New South Wales. Another sister, Mary, married Michael George Conway, Esquire, in February 1843 at Newry, Ireland. Michael was the editor of the Newry Examiner at the time of their marriage. It's unknown whether Michael emigrated with Mary, but Mary died in Melbourne in 1899, and there doesn't seem to be children from their marriage. So as mentioned earlier, Alfred and Mary had 3 children. The first child, Mary Judith Antonina Jennings, was born at Warbricken on the 10th of May 1866. She died on the 10th of July 1918 at Brisbane, aged 52. She did not marry, nor did she have children. Her brother Alfred was the executor of her estate, and she is buried at Bronte Cemetery, New South Wales. Mary received £200 per year for life from Mr. Hugh Herbert Daly Kelly's estate, her brother-in-law. He was the grazier from Garrawill, Liverpool Plains, who died in December 1913. The second child, John Francis Jennings, was born in Deniliquin on the 22nd of November 1868. John is the only descendant of the Australian Jenningses to keep the line continuing. John Francis Jennings must have left Deniliquin and went to his father's Toowoomba property, Westbrook, as he went on to marry Agnes Byrne in Toowoomba, Queensland, on the 9th of May 1900 at St Patrick's Church. They had 2 sons, Francis Patrick, born 1901, and John Bernard on the 27th of July 1903. He is recorded at residing at Westbrook in 1904, and John Jennings died in Brisbane on the 8th of January 1927, aged 58. Out of the 2 sons, Francis Patrick married Cecil Hives in Queensland in 1933. He was a dairy farmer at Middle Ridge, Queensland, and they had no children. And John Bernard married Marjorie Ryan, the daughter of the Queensland Police Commissioner at Toowong, Queensland in 1932, and he died in 1964, aged 60, and they had 3 children. The third child of Sir Patrick and Mary was Alfred Martin Peter Paul Jennings. He was born on the 29th of June 1862 at Warbricken. He married Cecily Marr at Coleroy Homestead at Merriwa, New South Wales, on the 21st of November 1900, and he was a grazier at Cassillis, New South Wales. They had 4 girls, 3 survived infancy. Clee and Cecilia did not marry. Mary married Hugh Carlisle Foster at Muswellbrook, New South Wales in 1936 when she was 32, and they had no children. Alfred Jennings died in Sydney on the 13th of May 1934, and he was 61. So it seems from fairly humble beginnings, Patrick Jennings was able to make the most of it on his move to Australia and encourage his family to come out to Australia as well.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.